is as a
Yeah,
fan,
I
and
saw.
for you, I'm sure as a friend of his.
I saw that. And I get it. Because maybe if you missed some of his run, you wouldn't necessarily know what it is that makes him so special. And listen, I try not to spend too much time thinking about what could have been gained if he had come back a long time ago, because maybe you could have still got him when he was at the top of his game physically.
Right.
But ultimately, I try not to spend too much time thinking about that, because what you're getting from him right now is great. So
Yeah,
why
it really
dwell
is.
why dwell on what could have been when what we're getting is still fantastic?
Because you know how people are, man. You get a little bit of the greatness, and it's like, what about this? Wrestling fans love to fantasy book. They love to drop people in these situations, the dream match scenarios and things like that.
Yeah, and that's what I was doing. But now I'm like, no, this is great. Let me just appreciate this. Let me appreciate the fact that he has a chance, in my opinion, if they wanted to do this, they have a chance to make Bobby Lashley and MVP a totally different level than both were previously. Now, specifically, MVP has the chance, in my opinion, to become a multi-tool player. Like, you're talking about a guy who could do commentary. You're talking about a guy who could do managing. He could do everything at the same time.
Yeah, and he can get in the ring when you need him to, too.
Yeah, he could instantly become. He could, if he wanted to, he could instantly become, and if it was wanted by other people, basically Bobby Heenan. You're talking about a guy who, and he's probably the same age right now as prime Bobby Heenan.
I mean, I can guess. You're probably right.
I think Bobby passed away around 70. And his prime years, 30 years ago?
Yeah.
So, maybe he's a couple years older, but he really could be. MVP could be a guy who you use on commentary, who you use as a manager, who, when you need to have him get beat up, gets beat up by, the big good guy who needs to beat him up because he can take the bump still. So he really can do so many different things, for you. And I just thought it was fascinating that Lashley, who has really been the same guy for a while, instantly became more interesting when MVP stood next to him. Like that, that's the telltale sign of someone being impactful in that role.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, unfortunately for Lashley, that's the lesson we learned from pairing him with Lio Rush, is that as compelling and dynamic as he is in the ring, he needs somebody to sort of get him over the hump on the microphone as a mouthpiece. Because, again, you pair him with Lio Rush and he got shot to the moon, and now he's paired with MVP, and he's completely 100%, nobody can deny, on the upswing.
Yeah, it's funny to me, like, they really haven't done that much when you think about it. I mean, it's really as simple as MVP just getting next to him, and all of a sudden the guy becomes, different overnight. And speaking of different overnight, a guy who's become different overnight in the eyes of all of us, because we finally know who he is, and that is Mark Calloway, a.k.a. The Undertaker. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me. How you guys doing?
Doing great now.
We're great, man. This is done a lot of interviews in wrestling over the last decade and change. Rarely get nervous, rarely bust out a full notebook of preparation. But I have to tell you, man, I was so surprised and now pleasantly surprised that you've decided to sort of not only do the doc, but take this step into doing press and kind of letting go of the character a bit publicly, was that something you planned to do around this doc, or has it just happened organically?
It's all happened organically. This whole thing, we didn't set out with the intention of making a documentary, a docuseries. Around the WrestleMania with Roman, I thought that was going to be it. I thought that was going to be my last Mania, my last match. So I wanted to document all that emotion, everything that went around that weekend, because I didn't think I was going to have another opportunity to do all of that. So that's how it really started. And then the next thing you know, we're 3 years down the line, and we have all this footage and all these interviews, and we kind of started to realize, like, hey, we really have something here that could be special. And I really have to thank Dan Puccinelli, who's produced this thing, and just him and his team have been so awesome about this. And really, I couldn't be happier with how this has turned out. And then in turn, all the media had no clue that this storm was coming to kind of follow the doc. But it's been good, because I get to elaborate on some things and explain some different things that maybe the documentary kind of raises a lot of questions about things. So it's I'm kind of starting to get comfortable doing it.
I was going to say, how does it feel? I mean, the last interview that I remembered you doing was, let me not be a bad guy and forget my man's name, but that dude in Canada who used to do all the wrestling interviews.
Right.
And you did that interview where you were basically still in character, 20 years ago. Besides that, I'd never seen anything. Does it feel a little awkward, or does it feel pretty good doing this?
It's been awkward. It's been awkward in the sense of talking so openly about the business. Like, I'm a dinosaur, and I was the last one to kind of try and hold on to kayfabe and keep all that together. I mean, I would actually cringe when I would hear people talking openly, about the ins and outs of what we do. And I just finally realized that, like, okay, this is where we're at. This is the sign of the times. And it's just really become more and more difficult for me to try to keep that aura and mystique around the character, because everybody, everywhere you go, they got a cell phone in their hand, and it's always going. And it's so it was really starting to become unfair to my kids and my wife and everything, for me to try and hold on to a little bit of the mystique and then be dad and husband. And it's just like, okay, maybe it's time to kind of open the door just a little bit. I didn't know we were going to kick it off the hinges. But
You're
right.
I know, we were just talking about that. I didn't even know if I wanted it. I was sitting there like, do I want a documentary on The Undertaker? I mean, you are such a figure that, I started doing kickoff shows and whatnot in 2017 with WWE, and I've only seen you backstage a couple times. And I think I politely and quietly shook your hand in catering one time, but the aura to me felt real enough that even when I saw you and I was there to work, I just still wasn't comfortable to come chat it up with you. And I liked that. There was an excitement to the idea that when you were in the building, listen, there's a certain respect you get from everybody. You are not treated casually when you're in the building at this stage in your career. And I just think it's turned out to be a beautiful thing. I've really enjoyed getting to see it. And now I wonder, if you are to have more matches down the line, could the character that we've gotten to know sort of free you up a little bit as a wrestling character and allow you to play on certain things that people have learned about Mark Calloway, the man?
I think so. And I think I think that's kind of when we did the Boneyard match with AJ. If there are matches in the future, it's going to be that. it'll be that character. And
a mix, sort of a hybrid of it all.
Yeah, that was kind of I think in the build-up, I labeled it the unholy trinity, which is the original Undertaker, the American Badass, and Mark Calloway, and they're all wrapped in together. And that's what that, AJ's promos, the way he crossed the line professionally, talking about my wife, like there's really no way for me to do that match in character, in the straightforward Undertaker character. It allowed me to keep elements of that, and then obviously elements of the American Badass, and then you get a lot of Mark Calloway, especially in the in the trash talking part of that, which I think was one of the key elements to the match, was to be able to hear the dialogue.
Oh, I love that. 100%. Yes, that was a big part of it. You could feel your character. Yep.
Then it makes that makes it more real, like, because that's probably the kind of shit that I would be talking if that was if it was to really happen. So I think moving forward, if I do anything else in the ring, that's probably what you're going to get, is that iteration of the character.
Now, if we are to get you in the ring again, do you think you could say goodbye? So much of this story is about you figuring out how to say goodbye, and which is such a real thing for people in many walks of life, but particularly professional athletes. Now, do you think you could say goodbye after a Boneyard match, or do you think you need one more time in front of that crowd to really have it be an official goodbye?
I don't know. We'll see after episode 5. I can't serve that up to you yet, brother.
All right.
I got 2 more episodes to come out. I can't.
Hey, listen. Now you got to keep documentary kayfabe. It's a different world altogether.
It's a whole new deal.
All right. Let's go back in time. I want to jump back and start at the beginning and talk about your debut and your original conversations with Vince McMahon. When you came to the WWF, do you remember the early conversations and what you and Vince discussed early on about what this character would look like?
Yeah. So I'm sure by now you've heard the Eggman story.
Yeah.
Right?
Of course.
So I was just thrilled. I had no clue what Undertaker was. I just knew it wasn't Eggman. And, I was thrilled about that. He brings me up to Connecticut, and we meet, and he's got storyboards of what he thinks this character is and what it look. And I was just like, wow, this is really cool, and it's really different. And immediately my mind's just spinning, right? Like, okay, where am I going to take this? I'm thinking Freddy Krueger, and I'm thinking Michael Myers, and Jason Voorhees, all these super killer villains that are in all these slasher movies, and but then I'm also trying to figure out how it applies to professional wrestling, and so originally he gave me the likeness, and then it was kind of a lot of it was put in my hands to develop, and it took me a while to figure out, because at that point I was still relying on being a big guy that could move around and be athletic and do a lot of things. And it took me a couple of times out to realize, okay, well, this isn't really going to work for what I've envisioned this character. So I had to slow down. I had to slow down some of my pace and slow down some of the athleticism. And so that's how then I figured out, like, I'm going to go really, really slow, and then I'm going to bang, and then I'm going to blow something out of the water and catch people off guard with it, just like they do in the movies. Like, the guy's running and running and running and running and goes around the corner, and then there's there's Michael Myers kind of a deal. So I'm trying to figure out all of those elements, and then how to make it work in a professional, in a wrestling ring.
Why is it that you think you leaned so much into the character? Because I know before you come to WWE, you're in WCW, and you tell a story of being told that nobody's ever going to pay to see you wrestle. Do you think that's why you try to like put it together and go so deep in the character with it to be more of a complete, well-rounded wrestler than some of the old school guys who just grapple?
Well, I knew. So just at the time period, I mean, there were so many over the top characters already. You know, I mean, everything was over the top with WWF. Mm-hmm. So I was trying to figure out how am I going to separate myself from what everybody else is doing? How do you stand out with all these already established performers? And then this was, he had that character. Vince had that character for a while. He just didn't have the right guy that he felt like to do it. I guess he needed somebody big that didn't have much personality to. So here I come stumbling right in on that. So I got lucky there. But I felt like it was given to me. So I really wanted to, one, Vince has given me an opportunity after I'd been told that, right? I mean, that when they told me that I was, no one ever paid to see me money. I mean, you can imagine the size chip that went on my shoulder.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, okay, screw you guys. You will regret the day that you didn't sign me to just a little bit. And that's all it would have been. It's so crazy how things work out. Like if they just give me a little extra cheese, I mean.
Oh, so you were just trying to get a little, somewhat appropriate amount of money, and you would have stayed being mean Mark.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I wanted to be. I didn't know any better, but I mean, I figured I was a more mainstream wrestler, right? And that's where WCW was at the time. And Vince had all these different characters, and that didn't really seem to suit where I wanted to be. I wanted to be there with Flair and Arn and all those guys. That just seemed to fit my outlook on wrestling. And then, they didn't, and believe me, I wasn't asking for, I wasn't asking for the Lex Luger deal or the Road Warrior deal.
Right.
Just a little extra cheese, and
And then here we are 30 years later.
They ain't nobody's gonna pay money to see you. We're gonna give you the same deal. I'm like, okay, writing's on the wall. Yeah, they didn't even bump me up a little.
And did you call Vince, or did they call you?
So Paul Heyman is managing me at the time that this all came about, and Paul Heyman and Bruce Pritchard were close. Mm-hmm. So Paul and Bruce were talking, and then Bruce was working on Vince, and so then I guess Bruce had finally got Vince to agree to watch the Great American Bash that I had with Lex Luger. I don't know, maybe a week before that, I really screw up my hip, right, in a match. So I can barely move, but I know I got to go out and do something, right? So Vince watches the pay-per-view or the American Bash, and he goes, he's okay, nothing special. And yeah, exactly. So, but Vince, we finally went to the Meadowlands, I think, and right the next morning I had a meeting at the house, and even then I went in thinking I got this. Had the meeting, I don't know, maybe 2 hours I spent with Bruce and Vince and J.J. Dillon and Pat Patterson. Have this meeting, and think I'm being impressive and charming and everything else. At the end of the meeting, Vince looks at me and he goes, well, we don't really have anything right now.
Oh, no.
And I've already given my notice. Thinking like, I got the meeting. I figured the job's in the bag, right? So I'd already given my notice down at WCW. And so that was a little bit of another little.
Now, was he messing with you? Was he just
no, he was serious.
He really wasn't sure.
Yeah, he didn't have anything. He's like, well, maybe after Mania, we'll have some slots open up. We'll be moving things around. And I was like, okay, well, thank you. I appreciate I appreciate your time. And out the door I went. They did within a few weeks, they called me and said, hey, Hogan's doing this movie out in LA. They wanted me to go read for it. And I read for the movie. I got the part.
Was that Suburban Commando?
Worst movie ever. It was awful. It truly awful. But that kept me busy for a little while, and then finally I got a call
for Survivor Series.
Yeah,
and
so
let's fast forward to the '91 Survivor Series. What do you remember about the week with you winning the title, and then the decision to give it right back on this Tuesday in Texas? What was that week like?
Well, that was crazy. Like, so, it started out bad and just, it progressively got worse. Like, Hogan claims that I hurt him on the tombstone during the pay-per-view, right? So I'm thinking to myself, like, I didn't find out till Tuesday. I knew there was going to be another pay-per-view, but I didn't know that I was going to drop the belt back and what was going on. That came up out of nowhere. But I kind of figured like, oh, okay, maybe it's because he's telling everybody that I hurt him, and Hulk was still the golden goose at the time. So I'm thinking, okay, this is they're going to take this off of me because they can't trust me or whatnot. It really wasn't explained to me what the reasoning was behind it.
And by the way, what a different era this is for you, because you've been the locker room leader for so long, the conscience of the locker room, all these nicknames. But back then, you're still a relatively new guy. So how do you even handle when people say that with Hogan saying you hurt him?
Well, fortunately, like I was devastated. And I was, the whole deal was, it was a setup from the whole get-go, right? So back then, we would usually show up noon, on a TV or pay-per-view day. We show up at the arena around noon, 1 o'clock. Hogan would roll in about 4 or 5. So I remember getting there about noon, and Hogan was already there. And I'm walking down the hall.
Red flag number one,
right? So he goes, hey kid, can I talk to you, right? So we go into one of the locker rooms, into the shower, right? That's where all the business was always done back in the day. You went into the shower, whether it was to fight, settle, whatever score, it always happened in the shower. So he's telling me, he goes, hey, I got this neck injury. He says, I'm really nervous about taking your finish. And I was like, Hulk, believe me. I said, I will protect you. I pride myself on not hurting people. And I promise you, I will have you so tight that there's no way possible that you're going to hurt your neck. So, with that, we went on about our business. Every point during the day, I'd pass him in the hall or whatnot, I'd get remember about my neck, right? So that's all I got all day was my neck. So we go into the finish. Flair comes down, slides the chair down. I pick him up. And when I tell you I had the brother secure, he was secure. Boom. I give him the tombstone. As soon as my knees hit, I hear, oh. You got me, brother.
My neck and my back.
My neck and my back.
Yeah, wow. I am much like, how I'm like, you have all these, like, I'm what, 20, I was 24, 25 years old. And, I just crushed Hulk Hogan, right? That's what's going through my head. Like, they gave me this opportunity. They gave me the chance to run with the ball, and I just hurt the golden goose. So I'm just devastated, mortified, right? So they get Hogan out of the ring, and, I get the belt, and Paul Bearer and I are doing our stuff. So, I go backstage, and where I was asking, where's Hulk at, right? And he's always laying on Vince's office floor. So I go in there, he's laid out on the floor, he's carrying on, and like, I'm going in to check on him, but then here come the paramedics and stuff. So here, me and kayfabe, right? So I go behind a wall with Shane. Me and Shane are behind the wall, and I'm having to, listen to, can you feel this? Can you do that? And then I hear somebody get my wife and kids on the phone. I'm like, are you? So you can only imagine, right? Like, I don't know what the hell's going on, other than the fact that I just hurt the golden goose. Shane's right there telling me, he's like, Mark, he goes, his head wasn't anywhere close to touching that mat. And I'm like, no, man, I just couldn't hear it. Like, I was like, no, man, I heard him. I don't know what, I couldn't put a thought together. I just thought I'd killed him. And and we didn't have access back then to watch things back right away like we do now. So I didn't see it until Tuesday in Texas, because the next day I think the next day I was in Hamilton, Ontario, defending the title against Davey Boy Smith, or something. I was gone.
Because there's no Monday Night Raw.
Yeah, there was no Monday Night Raw yet, right. And we had house shows. So I finally got to see, but by now a lot of the boys had come up to me, and they're like shaking their head, like, his head never got anywhere close to the mat. And you watch it back, you can tell his head never touched. And so now I'm in this precarious situation. Like, I'm still a greenhorn, right? I mean, and now I've got to confront, the face of wrestling, the biggest draw, ever. And now I've got to figure out what I'm going to do here. Like, as a man, I got to know what the hell, but I also know that it's risking my professional career. And at that point, everybody's so paranoid too about their position and their spots, and you don't hurt the top guys, and you don't hurt anybody, but how that works. And I finally, I got to San Antonio, and I was like, Terry, I watched it back. Your head never hit. He was like, well, brother, what it was you had me so tight that when we came down, I had nowhere to move. And that's what jammed my neck, because I couldn't move at all.
You were too tight. Seatbelt was on too tight. Got it.
It was too tight. And at that point, then I was like, okay. Then I knew, I was like, okay. I kind of realized, okay, I know what you're all about. And that's all I needed, I mean, but we're gonna fight him, or that was
so this is the perfect segue, and I didn't know we'd get there from this conversation. What did your relationship, what was it like with Hogan over the years? Because from that point on, right, from 91, when you're becoming the man on, his position as a fixture fades,
right,
as the years go on. By 94, we know that the him Brett Yoko deal wasn't the same Hogan. It wasn't quite the same. He's gone. Right. So over those years, when he's coming in and out, and he comes back years later, and now at that point, it's really your locker room. What was your relationship like with Hogan?
You know what? I always looked at it like, from where I was at that point to where I was at the beginning, I was in a completely different spot. So I didn't have to carry a grudge. I treated him with the respect that I think that for what he did for the business, he deserved. So I treated him that way. I was not overly friendly, but I did, you know, if he was in the building, I always made sure to say hello and engage him in conversation. But, you know, I've always, like I said, from that Tuesday in Texas, when I got that answer, I knew all I needed to know about him. And, you know, and that's the way I always, then, you know, my radar was always up anytime that I had to, you know, interact with him. But I dealt with him. I dealt in a professional manner with him.
But you took some pleasure when you guys were doing your thing much later and he was not able to get the motorcycle to drive at all and he just had to get off and run.
I laughed a little bit on that. I would be lying if I didn't say I didn't get a kick out of that.
So one night that your name always comes up in, of course, is the Screwjob. And you sort of playing the somewhere between peacemaker / you know, kind of hearing Brett out and enforcer. Can you take us through a little bit how you remember that thing playing out for you?
So, you know, at that time, Brett and I, we still are we're pretty close. You know, Brett's radar was up. Like he felt like something might go down. And so I was kind of working my way around. Like I kept asking Earl Hebner, I was like, hey, did you hear anything? Is anything going on? And, you know, every time I asked him, it was no, because I don't think he found out till late, really late, what was going to happen. But yeah, so I'm just kind of, you know, just keeping my, you know, my ears and my radar was up, like, okay, what's going to happen here? Is anything going to happen? And then it was getting close to the match time, and this is the one place where I let my guard down. Someone said, "Hey, why don't you go watch the match from Vince's office?" And so I was thinking, okay, that's fine. So I went back and was sitting in Vince's office watching the match. And then it all went down. All hell breaks loose, you know. And I ended up working my way to Brett's locker room, and you know, just like, I cannot believe that this happened. And finally, I left there and I went to get Vince. So I was like, Vince has got to address this to Brett. And so I left there and was going to Vince's office. Vince was already on his way. You know, he was already on his way to come talk to Brett about it. Of course, you know, all the boys are, you know, in an uproar. And what I kind of did was like, all right, this is bad enough as it is. A lot of you guys that it doesn't affect, it doesn't matter, needs to stay the hell out of here, right? So there were a lot of people I didn't let in the dressing room. So I think Brett had Owen and Davey Boy. Seems like there was somebody else.
Was Jim there? Jim was still there.
It might have been Jim.
It might have been Jim. And then Brett, and then Sean was there, and then Vince came in with Shane and Jerry Briscoe, Pat Patterson, and Bruce Pritchard. So everybody sits down. Vince on one side, Brett's on the other side, and I took Sean to the far end of the dressing room, and I sat next to Sean because I knew at some point he was going to chime in, and that wasn't going to help anything. So we're sitting down there, and you know, they're kind of going back and forth. Vince is trying to explain his position, and Brett's, you know, giving his thoughts on what he thought about Vince and what he did, and basically said, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to shower, I'm going to get dressed. If you're still here, I'm going to knock you out, kind of a deal. And that's basically, they talked, he showered, he got dressed, they got up, and, you know, Vince said, I'm going to give you one. And I have, to this day, I cannot figure out how that punch got through so many people. It was like, I don't know, because there were so many people in there, and they weren't like face to face, but and that punch got through. He hit Vince. Vince went down, and that was it.
So Brett says it was an uppercut. What did you see? Was it a right cross? Was it a jab?
It was a right hand for sure. I don't know if it was an uppercut or more of a right, kind of a looping overhand right. But I know it hit him right in the temple. It hit him right in the temple.
And so is that just sort of the kind of guy Vince McMahon is, that if he feels that in this circumstance, the only thing that's going to happen is he's got to take the shot, he's just going to take it and kind of get up and keep it moving because he knows that's kind of what the locker room needs?
I think so. I think, Vince didn't want to do that.
Who wants to volunteer for a punch in the face?
Well, no, I mean, Vince didn't want to have to do business that way.
Right, of course.
In Vince's eyes, he couldn't let Brett leave with the belt and then end up on WCW TV the next day with the WWF belt. That was, so, and to the best of my understanding, Brett was not going to drop the belt to Shawn.
You think you could have helped if Vince had enlisted you to try to help with Brett? You think there's any way you could have helped?
I definitely could have. And that was, so the next day, so I was really pissed. I was pissed that it got to that point. And I didn't know, I didn't show up the next day till really late because I didn't know if I was going to TV the next day. Mick didn't go. And it was late in the day before I decided, no, I got to go find out what the hell, what happened here and why it was done this way. My point being was you should have switched, you should have switched me. You should have put me in the match somehow with Brett. I'm sure Brett would have dropped it to me.
Right.
And then I could have dropped it to Shawn later on, right after that.
Right.
And
there was a way to do it.
There was a different way to do it, but Vince had to make sure, and he had to make, he had to cover his bases, I guess, in his mind. And but that's kind of the point, I think, where the whole locker room leader was really starting to come about. Because
that had to solidify it. I was going to say that must have been
the boys knew how upset I was that one of us got screwed over, but then the office kind of could see the point of, okay, he's trying to do what's best for business. And it was that way for me. It was I'll defend you if you need to be defending, but it all ends up, it's all about business at the end of the day. And that's where I fell in that, it was one of the rare people that I guess that kind of fell into that groove where I was trusted. Yes, I was one of the boys, but I was trusted by the office, just like, I was sitting in on their meetings. I wasn't, but.
A wrestling question. Where did you get the inspiration to come up with so many signature moves that are not finishers? Whether it's snake eyes, choke slam, last ride, old school. Was there someone who inspired you to do that? And also, where did I might have missed where this happened. Where did the name Old School come for Old School?
Oh, it's funny. I want to say it either came from Tommy Dreamer or, of all people, Victoria.
Really?
I'm not sure which one of them was, but one of them just, yelled out one day, "Old School," and it stuck. And especially when I was American Badass, I'd yell out "Old School," and that just stuck. I can't take credit for that. That somebody just said it, I think, in passing. And
was that just a thing you'd always been able to do, that you knew was a good trick of yours, that you were so big but could walk the top rope?
So when I broke in Texas, I got an opportunity to work with the original Spoiler. And that was his move. He was about 6'4", 6'5", about 275. And I knew when he did it to me, I said, as soon as this guy retires, you know, and he was late in his career, I said, that's mine, you know. And so, you know, I watched him do it and figured it out. And, you know, there was a time there that I actually walked the top rope and walked down the top rope and then dropped an elbow. But that's probably one of the reasons my hips got so bad. I remember when I was in WCW, Jody Hamilton, you know, we'd do 3 or 4, you know, squash matches in a TV taping. And I remember coming back one day and Jody Hamilton was sitting there at the monitor and he's kind of peeked up over his glasses and he goes, "You're taking years off your career there, kid." I was like, "No, sir, Mr. Hamilton, I'll be able to do this forever." Little did I know, by the time that I started with WWE, I already had a limp, you know, and it was from dropping that flying elbow off the top rope.
How's the leg drop on the apron feel, by the way? That's another one you do that always looks brutal.
It is. It's brutal for me. It's not so. It's not. I mean, depends who it is. But
no,
yeah.
It should be good for them. But for you,
it's pretty good for them.
That's not the place on the ring you want to fall. I mean,
that's the hardest part of the ring. And yeah, it looks great, but man, it's rough, and it gets rougher. Like when you're doing it all the time, you kind of get conditioned to it. Yeah. But when you do it like once or twice a year, it's like, ooh. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what that felt like. Yeah.
But is there anyone else that did that? I mean, listen, there's everyone has their setup, right? You know, Randy, of course, has that second rope DDT. You know, people will have 1 or 2 things, but you really have like a lot of signature moves. Was that a plan, or these are just things that happened over years and years?
Yeah, I mean, 30 years. Come on, man. I mean, you got to pick up. That's where a lot of guys go wrong now. In the way they work is they have those 2 or 3 moves and they do them every single week, right? And then they don't have anything else really that they come up with, and they just keep relying on those same moves, like old school, for example. You know, after so many years of seeing it, I would use it as a cutoff spot. Like I would start up, I'd get on that second rope, and I'd let whoever it was, you know, throw a couple of body shots in there and bring me out of it. Mm-hmm. And then hopefully, you know, sometimes depending on the crowd, then I'd go back to it and pay it off later, or maybe they didn't get it that night, you know. But I had to give options. There were certain times that I would get to the top rope and then I'd let them arm drag me off the top rope. But I would use those signature moves to set up, you know, spots that they weren't expecting. But I mean, it's after what you have to consider how much TV time that I've had. If you don't continually add to the repertoire, then you're gonna come pretty stale pretty quick.
SGG, we gotta wrap. You want to get one more in here with the Undertaker?
Yeah, no, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this. I mean, you talk about being a locker room leader. We all heard the stories about Wrestlers Court. What was your role in Wrestlers Court? Were you the judge? Were you the prosecutor? And then, like, what was the most absurd, ridiculous case that you had to sort of preside over?
Man, that's going to be hard to narrow down. I was the judge, so I always heard the cases. In the heyday of Wrestlers Court, Bradshaw was the prosecutor, and then, you know, whoever was being brought up on trials, good luck trying to find a defense attorney. It was not going to be a good day, because pretty much, well, I would 100% of the time, if you got brought to Wrestlers Court, you were already guilty. You know, I mean, it was just the beginning of the sentencing.
It was you. So you were doling out the sentencing. That's what it was all about. Was figuring
formality.
Out
yeah, right. It was formality. It was you know, Wrestlers Court was kind of a, you know, there were different times. Like there were sometimes I'd pull people aside and say, hey, you know, you're screwing this up. Okay, you need to, you know, you watch what you're doing. And then there's other times that we could do wrestler's court. Obviously, it add a little bit of levity to the road. It would, it would break up the monotony of things, and also send a message like, you need to quit. You need to quit screwing up like this, right? Before it does become serious, and somebody wants to, sport turns into a fight or turns into something more serious. You could have a little bit of fun with it, and the lesson still get learned that, what you're doing is not working, and you need to change what you're doing.
Well, listen, I literally got to like a third of the things I wanted to get to. So many questions to ask you. And hopefully there'll be another time to do it, because now that you're comfortable in this role, I think your voice is such a great one to have out there. We are grateful for your 30-some years in this business,
Yes, thank you.
Us as fans, and grateful for you doing Cheap Heat and talking to us, Mark.
Well, I appreciate you guys. Like I said, I'll come back and we'll get some. I know I'm a little long-winded now.
No, I love it.
Oh, yeah.
I've been holding up for 30 years, man. I got to get this stuff out.
Hold on.
So when the documentary is over, you got to come back.
Exactly, because you tell stories, but they're all interesting. So there was nothing I wanted to rush through because these were all so good. We'll get to the other stuff next time. But of course, The Last Ride picks up June 14th after Backlash, and we look forward to that. It's a pleasure, man. Hope to do it again.
Hey, my pleasure, guys.
Thank
Thanks
you
for having me on.
All right, cheers.
Thank you.
Take care.
There he is, ladies and gentlemen. The Undertaker, the conscience of the WWE locker room. So many different nicknames.
His honor now, the judge of wrestler's court.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam Hopkins from WWE, for arranging that for me. There's not a lot more to say or do, SGG. I'm like so tickled. I have never seen, you did a great job not smiling through him basically in a mild-mannered way, crushing Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, no, it was beautiful.
You didn't think you were going to get that today.
No, I did not, but I loved it.
And listen, I have to admit, I have not listened to Simmons. I haven't listened to any of the interviews. I just didn't want to be influenced by it. I know that most of our audience is #WithALife, and this is the only wrestling podcast they hear. So I didn't want to I'm not doing the interview. We're not doing this so we get a headline. I don't even know if headlines have come from his interviews. All I wanted to do was, what would our interview feel like? What topics would we cover? I don't know if he hit the This Tuesday in Texas story. I have no clue. But the details we got on This Tuesday in Texas on the Screwjob, it's a reminder, SGG.
Mm-hmm. Yo, I never knew.
You never knew which part. Sorry.
The Hogan, like, it makes sense now when you think about how quick the belt went on and off of him. Like, Hogan politicked them. Like, of course.
It was the most Hoganish story. The story of the neck and the way no, it's too tight, brother. Oh my, it's the most perfect. Yeah. Like, that's the reason I believe it. Like, there are these stories that you hear about people. It's like any sort of crime. Where there's too much smoke, there's fire. That story of Hogan is so symptomatic of just what Hogan. My back. Yeah, it was amazing. It was mind-blowing. So I don't know if it's been elsewhere, but for me, and SGG, let me just tell you some of the questions I didn't get to here. And this is how much stuff he has. And I'm going to save this for if we get him back. We got to Hogan. That's good. I wanted to find out about HBK. Everyone says he was a pain in the ass, but how did that manifest itself?
I want to ask about Bone Street Crew. That's like Godfather. JBL, the Godwins, Yokozuna, Rikishi,
right? So I wanted to get to that too. JBL always tells me the story that when they had their title match, and JBL ended up getting chokeslammed through the car by Undertaker, he said that it was Undertaker's complete idea to have JBL get the pin clean in the middle of the ring. And that Undertaker was like, I want you. He was like, if you want to be as hated as you need to be, you need to pin me. And then I'll get the heat back by chokeslamming you through the car after, but you should get the pin. So I was curious about that story. I wanted to know who his closest friends from the business actually are. I got to the Snake Eyes and old school stuff. I wanted to talk about some of the other matches no one talks about at Mania. We always spend all of our time on like the last 10 years. But what about think about the amount of legends in the early years. 3 of his first 4 were Snuka, Jake, and King Kong Bundy.
Yeah.
So
And
I'm interested in that. And then Giant Gonzalez. I mean, what was that disaster like? You know,
and
God rest
honestly,
his soul.
too, like the streak matches, they didn't plan to go 20-0 or whatever it was.
No, it
It's
just kept happening.
yeah, it's a thing where like every WrestleMania they try to decide who goes over.